Hey, y'all, this is Tracy.
Hey, I'm Reese.
Welcome back to another episode of Haunted Tea Podcast, where we spill the tea about all things paranormal, creepy, and otherworldly. Oh, I have to ask, have y'all been keeping your New Year's resolutions, or did you skip them this year? We really would love to know.
I just skipped them completely. What'd you do?
I did not do any. I don't want to end up disappointing myself if I don't keep them. And plus, I like to try really hard to keep my resolutions throughout the year and not just make it, once a year.
With me, because I have ADHD, it's instead of doing like a resolution that I know that I'm absolutely not going to keep up with, even through the first week, I just set like little goals for myself that I can accomplish over like a couple days, and then I feel better.
Mm-hmm.
But the whole long-term resolution thing, it's not worth damaging my mental health by making myself feel worse for not accomplishing these set goals than if I just don't do them at all.
See, I agree with that. It's sort of like I spent many years dieting until I finally made a choice that maybe that eating like shit and living an unhealthy eating environment type of lifestyle, maybe I should stop doing that and then just spending all my time eating like crazy and then dieting. Maybe I should just make it a complete different change in my daily life. And I allow myself to mess up a little bit and be weak in little instances instead of just saying, oh, well, I screwed up, so we'll just keep going forward and just keep making more and more bad decisions based upon and piled up on another.
Yeah. It's hard to diet when you've got a house full of people that survive off of cookies and chips and shit. So at this point, I'm just like, okay, well, this is my food. Y'all don't touch it. Y'all eat whatever the hell you want, because it's easier for me to make my own decisions than to try to convert an entire family, you know?
I still live in the world of imaginary pretend and try to get my family to join in with me. And sometimes they do. But after so many times, they get tired of the next new thing. So I'm now doing it just for myself.
Yeah. So we're on like what, episode 6 now?
Yes, ma'am, we are.
Holy shit. So if you guys have listened to us from the beginning, or if you've stuck with us for this long already, you know that Tracy and I both have had not just a lifetime of paranormal experiences, but in some cases we may be guilty of intentionally bringing some hauntings to us.
No.
If you're new here, if this is your first time hanging out with us, you'll learn soon enough that while some of the hauntings and creatures that seem to follow us around are not of our own fault or doing, sometimes they 100% absolutely are. Not all of them, but in the case of this episode topic, yeah, we did this to ourselves.
And a lot of times and ways, it's been mostly positive. So,
in my experience, yeah. So did you know that the fear of dolls, not just haunted dolls, but dolls in general, has an actual name?
I did not.
It's called pediophobia, and it's kind of classified under the broader phobia of humanoid type figures, which is automatonophobia. And then it's related to pupaphobia, which is a fear of puppets, which is completely relatable.
These sound so strange. I don't ever think I would want to have pediophobia assigned to my name, ever.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I get it. My biggest fear, like, okay, so my first car was a hearse. And at one point, like, I drove around with a coffin in the back of it. And it was literally the best party car that I ever had in my life. You know, I was 18. But my whole childhood, me and my dad would always go investigate haunted places and go to cemeteries and all this shit in the middle of nowhere. My biggest fear when I was 3 years old, my mom had me watch The House of Wax with Vincent Price, and I had nightmares for months afterwards.
I can only imagine.
I mean, and Vincent Price, he's still one of my favorite actors, but at the end when his face melted off, and I know a lot of our listeners are probably familiar with the new House of Wax, which I haven't seen, but not the older one.
Oh, they got to watch the older one.
Absolutely. Anything Vincent Price is just amazing. But because of that, my biggest phobia is wax figures. I definitely can't go into the wax museums in like Gatlinburg or St. Augustine. I can't go to Ripley's museum because, you know, sometimes they have the wax cast of the world's tallest man and all that. I walk around a corner and see any type of wax figure, I have a complete and utter meltdown. And my family has made fun of me for the longest time.
Have you seen those prank reels with Arnold Schwarzenegger at the House of Wax and a wax museum? And people are walking up going, oh my God, he looks so real. And then all of a sudden he comes to life and he's like, that's because I am. These people are literally running in terror and pissing themselves.
I would literally have a heart attack. I would be on the floor in a ball, screaming and crying and probably peeing on myself.
So I wonder what yours would be classified under, because a wax figure is not a doll and definitely not a puppet, but maybe humanoid figures. Automatonophobia. Automatonophobia. Say that 5 times fast.
It almost sounds like, and there's probably a name for it too, but the automatron figures, like I always think of the country bears from Disney World.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. They're all terrifying. I can do dolls all day long, but the wax figures, I know that there's a dead body inside of them, and I'm terrified of dead bodies too. So there's that.
Mm-mm-mm.
So there was an article in the Smithsonian, and it says that dolls in and of themselves have been documented going back at least 4,000 years. They've been made of all types of materials like stone and linen stuffed with papyrus in ancient Egypt, sticks and rags, porcelain, wood, more recently plastic, even carved out of things like apples and walnuts. And children everywhere, spanning nearly every culture across the world, have been known to play with dolls. And part of their popularity and the integral part of childhoods everywhere is due to the fact that they're humans in miniature, and they can literally have any emotion or situation projected onto them. They can be made from anything and can be made into anything. And in many ways, the doll reflects the person behind the doll, whether it's a certain feeling or a way that one wishes they'd presented themselves. It's not a super far leap then that some of these items could be really loved. So much so that if the owner passed away, they would seek refuge within the confines of these beautiful dresses and fabrics that they love so much in life, with the soulful eyes and the deep curls, or else in the safety of the tattered cloth that they poured their secrets into.
I can see that literally crying into these tattered pieces of clothing because they've hung on to these dolls for so long that they're literally tears and cry snot is all soaked into that clothing, into the pieces that are still clinging to these dolls.
My kid's got this bunny that she got when I was pregnant with her and we did the baby shower.
Mm-hmm.
This bunny is tattered and in pieces and been carried around all over the place. And we've offered her so many times, hey, you want us to fix that? You want us to patch this? She's like, no, she will not have it. And a lot of these haunted dolls, they've got cracked faces, they've got hairs in the dresses and things like that. And I think that's more of just an indication of how loved they are.
Yeah, and I know it's believed by some that the animation of those haunted dolls, it comes directly from outside energetic forces that just decide to take up residence within the vessel. Well, that's what I don't know if our listeners are aware, but that's what they call where energy is stored or a spirit is stored. Like if you're talking about the story of the genie in the bottle or the genie in the lamp or the bottle would actually be called a vessel.
Yeah.
So some believe that outside energetic forces will take up residence within the vessel, but that allows them to keep living or existing within this realm. And that's one of the reasons they say that they do that. And then others like to believe, like what you said, that there's so much energy that's built within the doll owner themselves. They've built up so much energy and they're projecting it into the doll. And that's what transfers their energy into it, is because there's so much built up that they literally transfer it into the doll.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where the spirit then resides within the doll. And I'm using the terms loosely with each other because spirit, energy, a lot of it's the same. We're going to talk about servitors and tulpas later. And servitors, they're just like a thought form put into motion and they follow orders and they get a job done. Whereas like a tulpa is something that has its own free will and autonomy. And so that's kind of what I look at when it comes to, do we have a knowledgeable, intelligent entity, energy into this vessel, or do we just have a residual energy? And I think they make that distinction with spirits and ghosts too.
Yeah.
You know, there's sometimes where just energy resides and floats around or, hangs in one area, or an actual thinking, intelligent spirit. So.
Right. Like the residual haunting of the white lady that you see just walking up a staircase, but she doesn't do anything else. She doesn't acknowledge anybody around her, versus the intelligent entity or haunting that's actively opening all of your cabinet doors to mess with you.
Yeah. I mean, we never really know for sure. It's all up in the air about whose guess or whose research or whose theory is right.
Mm-hmm.
But I'd like to know why these energies or spirits are choosing vessels in the first place and why they're choosing dolls.
I wonder if it's a safety thing, especially in the case of dolls. If the energy could start to store up in the dolls while the owner is still alive. Like there's just so much energy put into that vessel
Hmm.
that ling on, and eventually we'll talk about it in a little bit. This energy can morph and start to take on a life of its own and independent thinking. And I wonder if that can happen while the person is living and it kind of splits off and starts to become its own being or entity.
Right. And what else comes to mind is thinking about those outside energies. If it doesn't come from the owner themselves, then why are they choosing dolls specifically?
Right. So researchers think that it could be because the dolls have human like forms that are ideal for the residual energy and spirits. So I guess they're seeking out something that's similar to what they were in life, but more so because in many cases, the living use their dolls, like we said, as human substitutes. And no, it's not like that. I mean, maybe sometimes, yeah, it could be like that,
Mhm. Oh, okay.
but it's more because there's such strong and intense emotional bond that people form to these dolls and teddy bears too. You see a lot of haunted teddy bears on eBay and Etsy and stuff, especially little girls that are highly emotional anyway. It's thought that if something tragic happens to the owner who loved that doll, or if that person suffered from these intense negative or unhappy feelings, the bad energy can transfer to the doll as well. And even though that transferred energy is residual, so it's not intelligence, it's like there's a leftover energy that's kind of stuck to it. And it's thought that if the energy that is stuck to it is strong enough or feelings were intense enough, that it can eventually morph into a thought form presence and manifest as a bad personality of the doll, which is where you see these bad haunted dolls.
Yeah, and your comment of thought forms, again, that reminds me I could make reference to servitors and tulpas, but we'll talk about that a little bit later.
So, in cases of residual energy, what's interesting is that it can remain for long periods of time without showing any signs that something's there. But okay, so say the doll goes to a new home and the new owner or place has the right energy to react to. Then the energy of the doll could become activated and shit could start going down.
Mm-hmm.
Or okay, say your grandma's sister had this little doll that she loved when they were kids, and then the sister drowned when she was really young. So the family packed up all the sister's belongings, they put them in a trunk, put the trunk in the attic, and forgot about it. And the house remained in the family for generations and generations. And then suddenly, like the last resident of that family, of that house, passes away. There's no one else in the family who wants it or to take everything. So all these people come in to do an estate sale. They clear out the house, they sell everything, and say the trunk and the belongings are all sold to the owner of an antique store who's out on a picking mission. So then the doll sits in the shop for some time and it's mixing with all the other energies there and maybe accumulating more residual energy from the other antique items that are left in the shop. And then the doll is eventually bought and added to a collection of antique dolls.
This is a really long migration this doll is making.
Yes, yes. And this doll could be sitting in this collection of antique dolls for days or weeks or months, but eventually that energy is going to mix with all the other energies. It's going to grow, it's going to morph, it's going to gain power and change. And all of a sudden, things start happening around the house until it's finally realized that the new paranormal events are coming from this one single doll. The doll didn't start out haunted, but that residual energy that was attached to her from the love of the original owner, the little girl, turned into a full blown thinking energy that was not related to the little girl who passed away at all. And it took on a life and a character all of itself.
Yeah, that reminds me of Robert. Exactly the type of situation that Robert was in.
So, for our listeners who are not familiar with Robert, can you tell them a little bit more about who he is?
Oh, you guys might enjoy this. He is the most famous haunted doll in history, or at least current history, which I'll talk about him in a little bit later, too.
There's other ways that dolls and other objects can become haunted as well. It's not just being loved into a full blown possession. Wandering spirits can be attracted to dolls for a variety of reasons that we will never know and decide to take a presidency. Like I'm picturing the hermit crab, and you get all these painted shells and you put them all in the tank with them, and then they walk around and choose which of the pretty painted shells they want to live in.
Oh, yeah, that's a great comparison. Maybe some spirits just feel naked and vulnerable without their shells. I mean, vessels or doll bodies.
Or maybe in life, the spirit had always wanted green eyes and blonde curls.
And they happen upon a doll that's the realization of that dreams.
I want to do that.
Right? I'm going to be blonde hair and green eyes, so I'm just going to grab Audrina and jump in.
Right? We can just any day, on Monday we can be a redhead with blue eyes. On Tuesday we can be raven haired. I mean, anything we want.
I don't know if they can jump that easily.
Yeah, but if we're going to dream, we're going to do it right.
If that's the case, I want to be a haunted stuffed bunny rabbit too and scare the shit out of some kids.
Okay, I have a story. I used to consider pink fluffy bunny rabbits the worst insult you could ever give someone. Just because I never was the kind of girl that was very floofy and feminine and all that. I just wasn't.
Right.
And so I had this snake, and she was a boa, but when I first got her, she came in a bag, and I untied the bag, and I was getting her out, and we were in front of my kids, and I didn't want to start screaming and cursing and losing my shit. And so I screamed at her, you pink fluffy bunny. And so from that time on, pink fluffy bunnies, they are my worst insult.
When I was little, my mom always knew that she won an argument because I would run through all the insults that my 2-year-old mind could muster. And then she always knew that she won was when I said, and you've got ugly hair too. So that's the first insult I could do.
I almost just spit my coffee. Okay.
So sometimes the spirit can be attracted to the owner of the non-haunted doll, and they choose that item to get close to the person as the vessel, which sounds kind of creepy, stalkery to me, but sometimes they're attracted to the residual energy that's already existing in the doll, and they attach to it and they feed off of that energy. Demons and other negative beings may decide to possess a doll because it's seemingly innocent, just how they may present themselves as children or other non-threatening entities. They may decide to seek out a beautiful porcelain doll with the intricate beadwork or a soft plushy stuffed animal because they're less likely to seem intimidating to unsuspecting victims. So they can use the vessel, they can get close to the owner and feed off the energy until they finally decide to make their move.
Yeah, remember our last episode we were talking about their energy vampires.
Well, and the chimes, I keep going back to that. That is the most seemingly innocuous item that I could ever imagine that would have a negative entity attached to it.
Right.
Another popular theory is that the spirit within the doll may be the earthbound soul of a human being, so someone who hadn't yet crossed over into the afterlife. And these often fall more in line with the little kids who pass suddenly or tragically, or for whatever reason, they don't go to the light because they were lost or confused or still hanging on to unfinished business. And I do wonder if the spirits of my dolls are in that category.
Why?
Well, because they both passed away tragically. One was 8 and one was 17. And you can feel that they're very innocent beings. But I do wonder if we had a medium come through to help them cross over, if they wouldn't choose to do that instead of stay with their vessel.
Well, I hadn't heard the stories of your dolls.
Yeah, we'll get more into who they are and their backstories in just a little bit. But just to wrap this part up, sometimes spirits are invited to enter a doll or any other type of vessel during a spell casting ceremony or summoning ceremony. If you're familiar with the Chucky franchise, that's kind of what happened there.
Right. Well, I'm sure there's dozen of other factors that would cause a spirit or entity to take up residence, and we may never know all of the reasons why, but in almost all of the cases, if the paranormal activity that's occurring around the doll is too much for one person or household to bear, you can remove the doll from the property, and that will usually cause the activity to cease, but not always. Sometimes, especially in cases where the spirit was summoned to the doll, or, of course, if evil entities are present, binding spells have to be performed to prevent the being from inhabiting another vessel. If they voluntarily went into one vessel, they could choose to go into another, or to keep it from roaming or creating more mayhem. But in last week's episode, if you guys remember, Rosemary Ellen Guiley came to the conclusion that demons were and are indeed the jinn. And so, in my opinion, just like we can interchange the words or labels of God with the universe, spirit, the all-knowing, the all-father, basically any label from various cultures from an omniscient being that has intelligence and has an effect upon our spiritual and physical existence, we can also assign differing labels to the neutral and more negative beings that exist, like tulpas and servitors. Do you remember, I don't know if you did, but when I was younger, I remember sitting on the porch with my Ebby, and that was my grandmother, but I called her Ebby, and we would be shucking corn. And one of our favorite things to do, we would love to find the little, I don't know, have you ever shucked corn, Reese?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Do you remember all the little worms that you could find in the corn?
Yeah.
Yeah, those were our pets. We loved them. But anyway, we would also then take the corn husks and the corn silk, and we'd make dolls out of them. Did you ever do that?
I don't think so. No. What do you do? Like, you braid it?
Well, you can fold it over into certain forms, and then you wrap it around at certain key points to where it ends up having the head and the body and the arms and the legs, and you can form it into a doll, which it's interesting because we've always made dolls as humans since the beginning of time.
Yeah.
And then you add in that humans have this sort of predisposition to assign shapes as faces. Like, we're built to do that. And I'm not exactly sure why. I remember it is in reference or has something to do with us being able to differentiate or distinguish between animal and human faces.
Mm-hmm.
And people are more drawn to or more predisposed to be finding the shape of faces in the folds of cloth or, unfamiliar terrain, that sort of thing. So, okay, we've talked a lot about basics and the possible whys of haunted dolls, but let's switch gears a bit and discuss some of the more well-known haunted dolls. One of the most well-known dolls, especially currently, well, Reese, who comes to your mind first? Who immediately pops into your head?
That's Annabelle.
Oh, look at you. When I started thinking about doing the writing and research for this episode, she was the one that came to my mind first as well. Well, that's not quite true. The first one that came to my mind was my own personal experience with a doll, but then a well-known doll was Annabelle.
Mm-hmm.
And I know I do have some education, and I know that getting your information from Wikipedia is generally frowned upon. But in this case, the information provided was spot on. And Wikipedia provided us with the information that this is, quote, Annabelle is an allegedly haunted Raggedy Ann doll housed in the now closed occult museum of the paranormal investigators Ed and Lorraine Warren. Annabelle was moved there after supposed hauntings in 1970. A character based on the doll is one of the antagonists that appear in the Conjuring universe.
Mm-hmm.
End quote. So Ed and Lorraine Warren, a lot of people know about them, a lot of people don't. They were demonologists, and they investigated quite a few paranormal cases, the most famous of which was the Amityville house.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure almost everyone has heard of that.
Yeah.
But in addition to that case, another famous one involved, as I mentioned earlier, was the Annabelle doll. And she is a Raggedy Ann doll, originally gifted to a young nurse named Donna by her mother. When Donna took the doll back to her apartment, she and her roommate Angie noticed it would often change its position, moving from one room to another, and they'd find notes scattered around the apartment reading, "Help me," in a child's handwriting. Now that would creep me right the fuck out.
Yeah.
Lou was Angie's boyfriend, and he claimed that he woke up one night totally frozen and saw or felt Annabelle slowly crawling up his body, attempting to strangle him.
Mm-mm.
And that reminds me of last week's episode again, unsuspecting people's experience of having shape-shifting shadow people crawl up and onto them while going through sleep paralysis.
Mm-hmm.
And apparently Donna and Angie then reached out to a medium who told them the doll was possessed by the spirit of a 7-year-old girl named Annabelle Higgins. And the medium was absolutely certain that the spirit was ultimately benevolent. However, Ed and Lorraine, they had a differing opinion. They determined that a demonic presence was inhabiting the doll, and they performed a blessing in the residence before taking Annabelle off the young women's hands. Sadly, Ed and Lorraine ended up divorcing, and they're no longer with us. Ed died on August 23rd of 2006, and Lorraine died on April 18th of 2019. That wasn't too long ago. And they're both buried at Stepney Cemetery in Monroe, Connecticut. Our listeners, you guys, you might be interested in Ed and Lorraine's experiences. So I'm going to give a list that has their published works. First one, I'm going to tell you about Graveyard, True Hauntings from an Old New England Cemetery. The second book Ghost Hunters, True Stories from the World's Most Famous Demonologists. Third book, The Haunted, The True Story of One Family's Nightmare. Fourth book, In a Dark Place. Fifth book, Werewolf, A True Story of Demonic Possession. Sixth book, Satan's Harvest. Now, I've only listened to 2 of these, and they were on audiobook because I drive so much. But I was fascinated. I would love to read all of these.
Yeah.
But the story of Annabelle creeps me right the fuck out. Because when I was a little girl, I was about anywhere between 5 and 6. I had a life-sized Raggedy Ann doll, and she was the same size as me. And I remember that because I would argue with my mom before school almost every morning because Annie, and that's what I called her, interesting if you was telling me to wear her clothes to school. And, of course, Mom never approved or thought that was such a great idea, but I never actually heard Annie's voice out loud. It was more like a knowing in my head or a strong feeling. And then I would respond to Annie. And I remember saying things, basically telling, okay, I'll try. I don't know, but I bet Mom won't let me, or bargaining with Annie. Yeah. Trying to explain to Annie that I probably wouldn't be allowed to. And there's a couple times that I even put on Annie's clothes under my clothes. So
appease her.
It's surreal to think about that now because honestly, if I think about it, it makes me feel like maybe I was a little crazy. But at the same time, I know it happened and it was valid. So
that's the same age that kids have invisible friends and things like that. And with the invisible friend phenomenon, how much of that is in a kid's head and how much of it is something that they're actually interacting with that adults can't see.
Right. And when I hear stories about invisible friends and make-believe friends, I always thought, well, I never had those. I never experienced that. But then you think about when you're more up close and you can see the trees but not the forest, and you know about your own experiences when you're calling a doll Annie. That's a real up-close, intimate experience, but I didn't see it as having a make-believe invisible friend. It was perfectly real to me.
Yeah.
And it's so funny when you're standing away from it and you're seeing other kids that are having them. You're like, well, that's, interesting, or that's weird, or that's different. It's interesting to apply that to yourself when it never really occurred to you that that's really the kind of experience that I was having.
Right.
Well, remember I brought up Robert earlier? As I said, he is the most famous, or infamous, might be a better term, in current modern history, and he is a doll that goes by the simple name of Robert. You can go to the East Martello Museum in Key West, Florida, and see him. We were talking about owners transferring energy. So Robert was owned by a man named Robert Eugene Otto. See what they did there? Robert, the owner, was an author, a painter, and he lived in Key West. He actually went by the name Gene, and the doll stuck with the name of Robert.
Yeah.
Robert the doll's website says it's believed he was originally made in the image of Gene, while others believe he was painted in a jester-like style. And I've seen pictures of Robert. I can't tell if he was a jester or not, but he stood 40 inches tall. If you think about that, that's pretty tall.
Yeah.
For a doll, especially for a child.
3.5 feet tall. That's as tall as my 2-year-old.
Yeah. He wears a little sailor suit, and they think that it was actually clothing that Gene himself wore when he was a kid, which, of course, makes me think of Annie and wearing her clothes. But Robert's grandfather supposedly got Robert the doll from the Steiff Company out of Germany. Does that sound familiar? Remember what you said earlier about teddy bears?
Yeah.
The Steiff Company is famous for inventing the teddy bear. It's just as a side note. In 1902, Richard Steiff designed a toy bear, and he made it with mohair. He called it Bear 55 PB. And he actually was inspired by an American president, Theodore Roosevelt, and the initially nameless bear received its name Teddy, which is still known today. It's ironic that in 1904, a company known for creating cute, cuddly teddy bears would go on to create Robert the creepiest and most haunted doll in history, though.
Yeah, that's super creepy.
You don't want to mess with Robert either. Apparently, he will demand respect from you because the legend says if a visitor takes his picture without his permission, bad luck, despair, and tragedy will befall the picture taker. Y'all can learn more at the website. It's www.robertthedoll.org. And we'll, of course, provide links and other juicy information on our Patreon. But there's actually all sorts of stories about people writing apology letters to Robert because they'll take his picture, or they'll be disrespectful, or they'll mock him because they're tough and brave until something happens, and they go away and their life starts falling apart. So they actually will write in apology letters to Robert.
You know what keeps sticking with me is that it's robertthedoll.org. That's a nonprofit. So that lends to the validity that this is what they say he is.
Yeah, it's valid. They're not just trying to make a ton of money. I don't know if our listeners are aware, but I make felted dolls, and I have a pretty large collection of alternative dolls, and I live with 3 haunted dolls. Reese, how many do you live with?
We've got 2. Their names are Brooke and Andrina. I'll go into a little bit more detail about who they are and their stories and everything in a little bit. But what I wanted to add here is, do you know how easy it is to buy an actual haunted doll? Well, I know you do because you've got some, but for our listeners, they are everywhere.
I did not realize how easy it is until recently when I got married, and I just added Noah and Betty to my collection within the past several weeks.
If you type in haunted doll on just Google, you're going to have so many pages pop up from Etsy and private little occult shops, and then you'll start getting all the ads and everything on Facebook too. We got our girls off of eBay, and there's dozens of online shops and sellers who specialize in dealing with haunted dolls, like a surprising number actually. And the cool thing too is that, especially like with the seller that our girls came from, they came from the same person. If you're making a conscious decision to buy a haunted doll from someone who specifically deals with them, and a lot of times you get the opportunity to kind of preview the dolls you're purchasing. So, for example, the seller that we bought from was a psychic who had already done pendulum and K2 sessions with our girls. So we had names, we had backstories, ages, even personalities to choose from, and kind of knew what to expect. And I still think it's a huge gamble to decide to bring any type of haunted object into your home and around your family, especially. We had to take a leap of faith that we were actually getting what we were paying for and not bringing a negative entity into our home.
How do we know?
Exactly. We have to trust that the person that we're purchasing from knows what they're doing, and that's putting faith in a human being, and that's scary as shit.
Well, and I can say, if you've had valid experiences like I have, we need to provide the links for some of the groups or sellers that we've dealt with, that we know that we've had valid experiences with on our Patreon.
Yeah, but we've said it time and time again here on the podcast, and I'm going to say it again right now, that dark spirits and entities like to present as non-threatening beings, and even or especially as children. So both of us with our haunted artifacts could have done something really, really, really stupid by choosing to bring known haunted dolls that were possessed, for lack of a better description, by the spirits of children into the home with our own living children and animals. And it's funny too, because it seems like the last time I went haunted doll shopping on eBay, the more evil or negative the spirit associated with the doll is, it seems like the more money that it was listed for. And I don't know if that's an attempt to discourage people who don't know what they're doing from messing with this kind of stuff, or if they just wish harm on people with a more disposable income.
Well, there always are those.
Exactly. My girls were less than $40 each, and some of these evil dolls I saw going for more than $15,000.
It's crazy.
It's insane. We got very, very, very lucky that our girls seemed to be exactly what we paid for and exhibit the personalities that we expected, maybe with some unexpected twists that have scared the shit out of us sometimes. But we could have done a very bad thing, and we could have gotten ourselves in a situation that we are not equipped to get ourselves out of. So when I was a little kid, I was the oldest granddaughter on my dad's side, and I was the youngest granddaughter on my mom's side. So all of my aunts and uncles and grandparents always gave me porcelain dolls at one point. Like, I think somebody gave me one because I never intentionally set out to collect them. But I think somebody gave me one, and then somebody else came over and they're like, "Oh, you have a doll. You must love dolls." And then, like, all of a sudden for Christmas and birthday every year, I was getting dolls from everybody. I'm just like, I never asked for this.
You were trained to collect dolls.
Apparently. And I had like the room, my bedroom at my parents' house is kind of weird. So you open the door and you come in, and immediately in front of you, there's this big built-in shelf into the wall, and then you have to turn left, and the room opens up until
Hmm.
the room. So as soon as you walk in the room, there's the shelf, and that's where all the dolls were. And my grandma, my dad's mom, had gone on a trip to Spain, and she came back with this doll that she wasn't porcelain, she was plastic, but she looked more like a Barbie. She was maybe 15 inches tall. She was on a stand, and she had the traditional Spanish fancy dress on. It was white, it had sequins, and then she had this headdress on. And the dress had whatever the stuff is that makes wedding dresses stand out, the hoops.
Oh, it had like a hoop. It had like a frame underneath the cloth.
Yes, yes, that's what it was. And at one point, they had her on my dresser, which was across from my bed and not on the shelf. And I don't know if it's because she didn't match the other dolls or whatever, but she was actually in the room. And for some reason, that doll scared the ever loving shit out of me. And I was maybe 6, 7, maybe a little bit older. But this doll, she would be on my dresser and I would lay down to go to sleep at night. And I used to always have a radio playing, and I would swear that I would see her moving and swaying and dancing and that the arms were moving, and it scared me so fucking bad.
Talk about a bad experience with dolls.
Yeah, and in my mind, I couldn't tell if I was actually seeing her moving or if it was my brain just assigning rhythm and human qualities to a doll that was in partial light. So I'll never know for sure. I know that she scared me even in daylight. So it could have been something.
Well, and as the years have progressed and our experiences have increased, and many other people's experiences, people are no longer afraid to talk openly about their experiences. I'd say that your experience really did happen and it was valid. We don't have to be worried or ashamed here
Mhm.
to talk openly about the things that have happened.
Right. And thank God for this platform because talking about this to like earth people is I just get crazy looks and like they want to drug test me because they think I relapsed.
Right?
What's crazy is that once I left my parents' house and started having kids of my own, they turned my bedroom into my oldest daughter's bedroom because she spent a lot of time with them, before I got sober.
Hmm.
And they had the same shelf in the room with the dolls on it when she had that room. And I had a conversation with her a couple years ago, and she was talking about how there was this one specific doll that always freaked her out. And, I asked her which one, and she was like, it was the black lady that would dance. And I'm just like, "Oh,
Oh, well, there you go.
there you go."
Instant validation, girl.
Yes, yeah. So finally, mom moved the dolls out of there because Sage was just so freaked out. But I don't know. I don't know if that was truly a haunted doll or maybe it was just the way that she was positioned that made her look like she was moving. I don't know. I know that I don't want that doll here. I'll have my mom take pictures of her.
Hmm.
I'll have her, but I don't want her coming here.
Oh, even now to this day, you wouldn't want to see if you could investigate further? You're still that terrified of that specific doll?
Yeah, no, I'll investigate her at mom's house. I'm not bringing her here to investigate. There was something that really scared me. Like, our haunted dolls don't scare me. It scares me when I see
Right.
things that I'm not expecting. It more like startles me when I see things that I don't expect from our girls. But this doll truly scared me. Like, I would want to hide my head under the covers type scaring me.
But now I'm asking, and okay, it terrified the shit out of you as a child.
Mhm.
Have you been around it as an adult?
Not really.
So do you think, what I'm asking is, do you think this is just leftover fear from being a child and you should pull up your big girl panties and investigate her and see what would happen? Or do you think that even to this day that fear should still be valid and you should still be that scared?
Um, I don't know. Because like I've always had experiences to a degree, even as a little kid. And there's the
Mm-hmm.
ones that startle you, and then there's the ones that give you that
Curl into the fetal position.
right.
Well, go with your gut. That's what we tell our listeners. That's what we tell each other all the time. Go with your gut.
Yeah, I'd like to have one of my dogs check her out. If one of my dogs check her out and they're not terrified, then I think we could bring her here
Oh,
to
yeah.
investigate. So, Tracy, you and I have both, as adults, brought haunted dolls into our homes and into our lives. But what do you do if you have a doll that you think could be haunted. Maybe one that was a gift from a faraway land, one that was handed down in the family. Maybe you had a crazy old aunt who never married and had kids, and she just collected dolls her entire life until she filled up her 3-bedroom condo, and all the creepiest of these dolls in this collection wound up being willed to you. What are the warning signs of a haunted doll?
Well, I guess it would just depend. Pack those bitches up in a box and send them back. I don't know.
So if you're truly worried that a certain doll that you bought or were given or was brought into your home might be haunted or possessed, there's a couple warning signs that you could be dealing with more than just porcelain and plastic. You could get a weird vibe from the doll. Most people who have had encounters with haunted dolls swear that they felt a strange energy emanate from the doll. That being said, it could just be a creepy doll. You've got to trust your gut. You can swear that you saw the doll's facial expression change. So it might not just be your imagination, just kind of how I questioned for years whether this doll was actually dancing or not.
Right.
A child who's near the doll might grow obsessed with it or is suddenly like acting out and blaming the doll on it. Haunted dolls often
Mm-hmm.
target children and they urge them to do terrible things. So you might want to listen to your child in this instance. And it's the same with invisible friends. We'll do a whole other episode on creepy kids, but
Right. Don't just dismiss it and say, oh, honey, it's fine.
or you worry about the kid just wanting to project their bad behaviors onto something else. It could actually be something. The doll could change positions or places without anybody touching it. That's a surefire sign that something's going on with the doll. And as humans, we want to rationalize it and be like, oh, the doll fell over. Oh, I must have set it on the couch when I was half asleep and forgot that I did it. Take that into account, people. If you start hearing strange noises at night that you never heard before, bumps and bangs after bringing the doll home, that's a pretty good sign. And paranormal activity in your house or around you could spike since you got the doll. Good rule of thumb to follow is that new paranormal activity might be tied to something you brought into the house. So if you recently brought in a doll or another object, particularly an antique object, it could have an attachment to it. But haunted dolls aren't just limited to dolls, though. So hear me out. There's been known to be thousands of other types of haunted dolls. Zach Bagans from Ghost Adventures has a whole ass museum of haunted stuff in Las Vegas. But teddy bears, other children's comfort items, type toys have also been known to have been possessed by spirit energy. When researching haunted dolls, we tend to come across a whole bunch of negative encounters, like what Tracy talked about with Annabelle and Robert. They're two of the most famous cases, and that could always wind up being what happens. I'm definitely not saying don't buy a haunted doll because I do not in any way, shape, or form regret bringing ours into our home. And Tracy, I don't think you do either.
I don't. And let's remind our listeners, they're not always negative. Now, like you said, there's some out there that are labeled or felt as being negative and they're big bucks. But there's several different labels that are placed on these dolls. There's negative, there's neutral, there's good. And the people that are doing these readings on the dolls, they get a good sense of what you might be dealing with. They might even warn you, hey, this doll likes to trick people. This doll likes to sing. This doll likes to say your name, and you'll hear your name being said, differently or whispered about. Or they'll actually give you the types of experiences that you could have and that they have had with the particular doll that you're looking at and that you're interested in. And so they're not always evil or scary or bad.
Right.
Some may just bring a smile to your face every day.
Right. That's how I feel. I feel like our lives have been enriched ever since we've brought ours into our home. They've got these vibrant, happy energies. One's got a bright white orb, one's got a light blue orb, and it's just very calming and comforting. But to our listeners, I implore you, if you're thinking about purchasing a haunted doll or a haunted object, please make sure you research the seller, read the reviews, ask a ton of questions about the doll in particular that you're looking for or looking at before jumping the gun. If you've done your research and you make the decision that you want to bring a haunted doll into your life, there's yet another list of considerations that should be made before purchasing a haunted doll. In addition to what we've already mentioned, the biggest one, of course, is that the doll may not actually be haunted. There's no real true way to guarantee that the doll or teddy bear or box of mirror or whatever else it is you're buying actually has a spirit attached, even if you've researched the seller and you're paying like $500. Even when using a reputable seller who brings videos and evidence prior to the sale, what's to say that even if there is an attachment to the doll at the time that they provide the evidence, what if the doll or the entity decides that they don't want to go to a new home and they want to just stay where they're at with their friends? So you buy this object, it gets sent, everything is as it's supposed to be, but the price tag is not a fail safe that you're actually going to receive the haunted object that you desire or the entity attached to the object. It's like buying a new animal. You're going to research. Most people should research and know where the animal is coming from, knowing, like the personality of the animal. You want to make sure that it's going to jive with your family. It's the same with these entities because they do have intelligence. Another big concern is, say you went ahead, you bought the doll, and the spirit and the doll actually arrived together. It's still bringing in a new roommate, one that may as well have been matched to you through a random app because you really don't know who it is that you're bringing in. In most instances, when someone's coming to live with you, you've already done a little bit of a background check. You know their general personality, their sleep, work, whatever schedule. And in most cases, you're going to do a Google search and probably a Facebook search, criminal search, so that you can learn as much as you can on this person before you give them a key to your home. But in this instance, this is really relying on the seller, whoever the doll is coming from, that the spirit is who they say they are. And let's not even get into the fact that demons lie. So even the seller could be fooled. When we bought our girls, we got like a 5-page sheet on each one of them with the history and names and likes and dislikes and how the seller had communicated with them, such as like dowsing rods and stuff, and ways that they like to interact or manifest. And I'll post those on Patreon. But the point is, we had to acknowledge that even though we had all this info, we could have very well have been inviting something very, very negative into our home. I think that we actually got who we thought we were getting based on our experiences so far. But we also have a lot of activity here that we can't necessarily say is not the entities attached to the dolls. So it's still a current and ongoing thing. The point is, what if you get what you actually paid for or adopted, but then you're not compatible? You thought you were signing up for a very benign, sweet old lady ghost, but instead of the smell of cookies baking and the clink of knitting needles and soft orbs and everything, you've got this grumpy spirit that hates the way your living room is set up and is constantly wanting to rearrange furniture. So you never really know. And then the last thing to consider when adopting a haunted doll, it literally might not be that interesting. Even if it's truly haunted, you might get someone who would prefer to sit in a corner and just kind of watch the household going ons instead of actually interacting and moving things around. One thing that we learned when we adopted our girls, and we did adopt them both in a very chaotic time in our lives, so that could have had something to do with it as well. But anyway, it's depending on the spirit, it could take weeks or even months or years for them to feel comfortable enough to show themselves and start coming out. We got our girls in September of 2022, and for at least the first 6 to 8 months or so,
We only had one or two incidences that we could kind of definitively say that it was them.
And that's a long while.
that's a long time when you're waiting for something to happen. And even now, like we talked about in another episode, it seems like the more other activity that's going on in the house with other entities, the girls seem to retreat, and it's like they shrink in on themselves and try to make themselves as small as possible. It could be the nature of each of their deaths, particularly the older one, but they seem to be intimidated by other spirits. So even though we've got activity going on here, it's not always attributed to them.
When I got my doll, she came with some little trinkets that they said that she preferred and liked to play with. And I also had gone out and bought some of those flashing cat balls. And when I first got her, I was not home. And so when I unpacked her that night, my son and I and my partner were sitting there, and I was going through her little bag of things that had been sent by the seller. And in the bag was a bullet light, some anointing oil, a little rosary, and a couple other little items that I have with her. And that bullet light started flashing. And it was fascinating to me because the bullet light would not turn off. It would keep flashing. So I would unscrew the bullet light a little bit. I don't know if y'all know what a bullet light is, but when you twist it, it turns the light on and off. It would not stay off. I literally had to pull it apart because it would just keep flashing. It was like she had so much to say, but I couldn't get a clear, I'm not psychic. I do have intuitive feelings. A lot of things that I worry about or that I am sensitive to, I can intuit that something might be happening, but I'm not your psychic that can really pinpoint things. And so I couldn't get a very clear reading on what it is she was trying to communicate. But literally, this bullet light, I had to completely unscrew it and take it apart to get it to quit flashing, which I also took a video of the very end of that. And as soon as I took the video, it stopped doing it. And I only got the very tail end, so it's kind of hard to tell anything in that video, but I will put that up on Patreon as well. But I was asking her questions. Her name's Mary, and she was once owned by a family that started experiencing paranormal events. And apparently, from what the seller said, they were scared shitless of her. And they had been told that a remedy for removing her activity and getting her to quit was to remove or destroy her eye. And so they tried to do that, and I guess it didn't work. So I now have a haunted doll with a fucked up left eye named Mary. Oh, you guys may not know this, but I live with primates, and one of my little monkeys, by the name of little Mr. Boaz Winklepeck, just so you know, he had to have a big name because he's such a little boy, but he was and he is completely fascinated by Mary. When Mary's in the room, he will not leave her alone. He runs on her, he hugs her, he looks at her face, he licks her face. And he doesn't do that. I have a pretty large doll collection. I have alternative reborns, Hempstead dolls. I've probably got over 40 dolls in my collection. And he doesn't do this with all the dolls. But he does this with Mary. And I don't know what his fascination or his attraction to her is, but he stays all over her. And I have another video of that in Patreon as well, of little Mr. Boaz Winklepeck communing with Mary. And, another experience I had, I think I told you about this one, Reese. This was one where I'm an artist in several mediums. One of those is felting. And I was creating a felted doll. And it was supposed to be a voodoo doll. And during her creation, I was putting a lot of focus energy into her. And in the middle of working on her, her head started to turn. And things started to fall off of the shelf, and just little strange things were happening. And I don't know if it was intelligent activity or just residual energy or what it was, but I also have a video of that. It's not a long video, but it shows where her head was turning, and that one startled me too. And that'll also be in our Patreon.
You sent that to me when it first happened, and that still spooked me. I had Sage and Nick both watch it, and there's just like this creepy feeling that you get.
Well, I know it was creepy to me.
Listen, I was like 2,000 miles away, and I would have straight up yeeted that thing.
Right? It was pretty creepy. And that's another thing. What if you bring a doll home and it creeps you out? What if it scares you? What if it's doing things that you just cannot deal with? Like you said, Reese, if we're bringing in a haunted roommate, what sort of activities or habits are they going to have?
Yeah.
You know? What do you guys, if you were going to bring a haunted doll into your home, why? Do you really want interaction with them? Did you just bring them into your life to take pictures? Okay, well, cool. There's no need to really waste any of your time and energy on interaction. But if you brought them into your life to interact with them, you should talk to them.
Yeah.
Give them small offerings. Show respect and concern. Ask them questions. If their energy shows you they want affection, give it to them.
Yep.
Many will reveal their likes and dislikes. You may not be able to completely understand their communications, but you can get feelings off of them. And some will tell you they don't even like where they've been placed, or, do they want the light off or on? There's lots of things that you can get off of them just through feeling.
With ours, we tell them consistently, you guys are family members. I agree. You definitely need to continue to interact with them. You're bringing an intelligent being into your home. You wouldn't bring a dog into your house and not interact with it. Some people will, but those are shitty people that don't deserve to have a dog.
Right.
It's the same with haunted dolls that you're intentionally bringing into your home. If you're going to make a conscious decision to bring them in, you've still got to pay them attention and give them what they need emotionally. And then here's another couple considerations. Are you wanting a party trick, somebody that's going to spook your friends out by, when you pull out an EMF detector and ask questions? Or are you wanting to have somebody around for experimental purposes and essentially use them as like guinea pigs for your own research? Are you wanting to actually add to your family in unconventional ways? Or do you already have a collection of haunted objects that you want to add variety to? You've got to consider your motive and your expectations very carefully with these objects, as you could just get a regular old porcelain doll, or you could get an object attached with a very active spirit that scares the shit out of you on a regular basis and makes you second guess your decision.
Right?
And then what? Say you live with this thing for a few months and you get way more than what you bargained for. You're seeing full bodied apparitions. You're having steak knives left out on your counter where your toddler can get a hold of them that you didn't put out there. You've got someone turning on your bathroom faucet in the middle of the night and costing a fortune in the water bill. What are you going to do if you can't handle the spirit? Are you going to sell it? Are you going to give it away to a friend who collects haunted items? Are you going to give it away to a friend that doesn't collect haunted items and not tell them what it is? Are you going to burn it? Are you going to drive it 20 miles into the middle of nowhere
That would be
in the
so
woods?
wrong.
Like, and even if you drive it 20 miles into the middle of nowhere and leave it in a cave in the woods, what are you going to do when you get home and it's already sitting on your porch before you make it back? What will you do if you find a way to get rid of the doll and the unwanted activity, only for the activity to continue or even amplify once the vessel is gone? You've got to have some kind of a contingency plan for these things, and at least make sure that you're stocked up on sage and Palo Santos and you've got a shaman's number on speed dial just in case you need it. The biggest thing to remember is that half the time, at least, an entity or spirit attached to something like a haunted doll is intelligent. It makes its own decisions. It has its own thought processes and logic that might make zero sense to us, decisions that might frighten us or our family or our pets. This isn't just a toy that you can bring into your home and play with it at will. It's a conscious entity that can exhibit varying degrees of emotion or even revenge. This isn't a genie in the lamp that you're the master of. You're never going to fully be in control of them.
Honestly, though, can we really say we're ever really in control, especially if they're intelligent entities that are trapped in a vessel?
Nope.
Now, in several instances here, I've mentioned servitors and tulpas, which we're going to be covering in a later episode at more in length. But basically, a servitor is an energetic thought form, and it's projected onto the physical realm by its creator, while a tulpa is more like a sentient, imaginary best friend that can adapt and make intelligent decisions based on its own will and autonomy in order to carry out what its creator wants it to accomplish. And vessels like dolls can be intentionally used as a storage space for them. When I was a little girl in 4th grade, I think I actually inadvertently created a tulpa. He would walk with me to school, and I felt a protection from him I just can't explain. In my mind's eye, I saw him. Okay, don't laugh too hard. But I saw him as a giant walking black and white cat. I literally named him Sylvester after that cartoon cat. He acted of his own free will on several occasions to protect me. I'll talk about him more in a later episode, too. But these entities that decide to inhabit dolls as a vessel, they can really be likened to the differences in a servitor or a tulpa. Full-blown intelligent thinking spirits or simple energy within a void. But you guys may not be aware, but you yourselves, you can also invite energies or spirits into almost any type of vessel, though dolls are one of the more favored choices. One of the best books I've ever read on the subject is entitled Creating Magical Entities, A Complete Guide to Entity Creations, and it was written by 3 authors. I'll put that in the Patreon as well so you can look it up. And as a side note, this book also discusses how to dismiss entities, and it's on Amazon for $14.95, so if you do decide you want to roll up your sleeves, so to speak, and get busy in the alchemy kitchen, please, as Reese just mentioned earlier, make sure y'all have a plan and you're ready for what to do should things go sideways. And remember, just because you can do something doesn't always mean you should. We do want to share our experiences with you guys, share in your experiences as well, but we also want to ensure that y'all keep yourselves safe and sane. Well, if not completely sane, at least not earning yourself your very own canvas hug me sweater. It's not unheard of for new practitioners to take an extra deep dive into the pool of madness because they become so obsessed with their newly discovered abilities and realities. Yeah. All the newly discovered possibilities and even more unexplained mysteries in the universe add to that the dangers of outside influences from wandering energies and spirits, and, well, you get the idea, but remember to protect yourself when performing any sort of paranormal, spiritual, or magical works. I know I keep talking about it, and I will continue talking about this on every episode we ever have because we do care.
Yeah.
You're vulnerable during this time when you don't set up defenses.
Mm-hmm. It's also not unheard of for previously benevolent spirits to, over time, start exhibiting anger or resentment for reasons unknown to anyone but that entity. So you might come in with a friendly,
Well,
benevolent doll that, turns on you.
Well, I mean, can you imagine the limitations you'd feel if you were a bodiless soul within a vessel and no one listened to you? Think of all the vengeful, unfulfilled, and bitter genie in a bottle stories where the grantee of 3 wishes is tricked and tortured because the genie or the jinn was already angry at being pent up for thousands of years and because the wishmaker had a poor choice of words.
Yeah. Look at Chucky. Well, Chucky was evil to begin with, but
Right. Well, we do have a listener that sent in her personal experiences as well. She has quite a large, extensive collection of haunted dolls and items. And her name's Jacqueline, and she talks about Sophia. And I'll read what she's written. One of the spirited dolls I have is a grandmother doll named Sophia. She came from Maggie's house. I am very good friends with one of the executors of Maggie's legacy of items. Maggie was a very well-known psychic in the Great Lakes area. She helped solve missing person cases, and Sophia has a porcelain head, hands, and feet with a soft body. Her story is as follows. She became the companion of a lonely older woman whose children were busy with their own lives. The woman would sit and talk to this doll often. It was better than talking to herself. One day, the older woman fell, and she couldn't move and could not get to the phone, which was in another part of the house. She was in pain and started to panic that no one would know she fell. Somehow, a call was made to 911 and a very quiet, almost too quiet voice briefly told them to come and where they were. The paramedics arrived and took the woman to a hospital. Meanwhile, her daughter couldn't understand how 911 was notified. She knew they found her mother on the floor, nowhere near the phone. When she requested to hear the tape of the call, she was confused even further. All she could hear was a wispy voice communicating to 911, but it was not her mother's voice. When the 911 operator asked for the caller's name, the name Sophia was whispered. This made her daughter very uncomfortable because she didn't believe in spirits. Afterward, when the older woman was discharged, she went to stay with her daughter to heal. After a couple months, it was decided the older woman would need to live with her daughter's family now. The daughter claimed she had always been uncomfortable with the doll, but as it was her mother's, she never said anything. However, now that her mother was going to move in, she forbid bringing Sophia along. So a new home had to be found, and Maggie was very well regarded by many in the paranormal field. The problem was Maggie had already passed. She was given the name of my friend who handled a lot of the items, and she agreed to find a home. That's how Sophia came to live with me. The background's solid. The daughter couldn't wait to get rid of the doll. She was afraid of it because she couldn't believe spirits and the whole subject terrified her. Sophia is a spirit with a quiet but strong presence, always watching over not only my family, but some of the spirits I have in my care came from the same collection, so there is camaraderie. It can be felt. She is not the primary spirit who watches over my home. And then she talks about Virginia. Virginia came from Maggie's estate also. Her vessel is a plastic bride doll about 16 inches tall and wears a perfect bride outfit from the time between 1960 and early 70s. Virginia's story is that she was married at the tender age of 11 in a polygamous community. Unfortunately, she became pregnant immediately and then died in childbirth. The other wives delivered any children and handled injuries. Doctors were not allowed. Virginia was far too young to go through all that, so her spirit hangs on and she chose that doll. I don't remember an exact year when Virginia passed, but based on what I saw, yes, I saw her. I'm guessing late 60s to 70s. When I saw her, she was wearing a long-sleeve blouse with a more typical schoolgirl look, with a modern plaid jumper, white knee socks, and very 70s Mary Jane-type shoes. My guess is this is how she wants to be seen. The thing about this visualization was that the apparition appeared to be in blue and white, just like black and white TV, but instead it was blue and white. She was crawling on her belly, using hands and feet to propel her along the upstairs hall floor. Creepy, yes. Scary, no. It was night. I felt something was off, so I turned around to look at the hall behind me, and she appeared directly behind my feet on the floor, looking up with me with a very mischievous grin. She wanted to scare me. Instead of responding to her, I turned back around and calmly walked the few feet into the bedroom and closed the door. Virginia is a very active spirit. She's almost always close by. She likes my husband. She loves to prank him, too. One of the most amazing things was his waking up in the morning with a pillowcase draped over his bedside table. That pillowcase was previously folded and sitting in a folded pile of things to go into the linen closet. It was not on top. My husband asked me why in the heck I would put a pillowcase over his table. I didn't see it. I was sleeping when he woke. I would say he was angrily confused as to why I would do that. I explained I didn't buy he didn't believe me initially. My husband knows all about my gifts, but he's uncomfortable with all of it and would prefer to ignore and disbelieve. I'm sure that's why Virginia likes to prank him so often. She would take things and hide them. It got to the point that my husband would just ask out loud if that item could be brought back, please, with emphasis on the word please. She still pranks, but most often it's me now. I just laugh. She acts like I did when I was 12 or 13. When I'd stay with my aunts, I'd pull pranks on them constantly. That's exactly what she's doing. She has quite a bit of power in that she can grab and carry a pillowcase over a bedside table, but she's just a 12-year-old in spirit. As time goes on, she will either choose to move into the light or probably mellow with age. Jacqueline goes on to say the key with all spirits is to never show or respond in fear. Never fear is a type of energy spirits can use to replenish their energy. Remember, we talked about energy vampires and how they like to feed off of us. Yeah. They need energy to interact with us. However, fear and terror are the most powerful fuel that's produced by our emotions. All of our emotions create energy. Always do your best to keep yourself centered and filled with curiosity and preferably love when dealing with spirits. No one should engage with spirits if they have residual emotions that are prominent. Thinking about something that makes you angry, just thinking about it, or something that recently hurt your feelings can be used by negative spirits as super fuel. If you're going hunting, best stay home until you feel more centered. Negative emotions are addictive to spirits. A normal spirit can become addicted to fear energy and change into a very dark entity in order to produce their fear drug. So, rule number 1, never let them feel or see your fear. Even if you're initially frightened during a spirit encounter, focus on something that changes your energy. If you can't push through initial fear, go outside until you can center yourself. Spirits can also absorb good energy, and it's never meant to harm you. Just give them verbal permission for enough energy to engage with you, to communicate. There's no harm there. And see, that makes me think back to when I saw that shadow circle over the chimes that I talked about. I really do feel if I had had wide open eyes and turned over and directly looked at and interacted with that entity or spirit or jinn, shadow person, shadow object, I really feel like things could have gone to hell literally in a matter of seconds.
Yeah, seeing her crawl on the floor like that, I don't know that I would be able to control my terror. When you see something that you're not expecting, you get that jolt of fear anyway.
Mm-hmm.
And
I don't know that I would be able to control that, seeing something of that nature.
Yeah. And it takes an incredible amount of willpower and conditioning to be able to remind yourself not to stay attached to that emotion and to let it go through you instead of clinging to you.
Well, and that's the thing. We can know these things, but like as a vet tech, I've worked in the field for 25 years. If somebody else's pet has a medical emergency, I'm on top of it. I'm cool, calm, rational. When it's my own animal, I forget all training that I've ever learned in my life. And I feel like it's the same thing. It's easy for me to sit here and say, like, you've got to set that negative emotion aside and focus on the calm. But if I was in that position, I would be absolutely terrified. I would not be able to maintain that at all.
Right. I don't know what I would do except for it seems like a lot of times that my instinct is to just stop and breathe. Otherwise, you're going to run.
Yeah.
Or you're going to scream, or you're going to become hysterical.
Yeah.
All right. And so the last story was Nina. Nina, she says, is a very beautiful bride doll, 12 to 14 inches tall and all porcelain. She acquired Nina from a paranormal group who did an investigation for a serious haunting. The couple who lived there had the feeling that it related to a specific person who had passed away about a year earlier. There was a lot of activity. Hostile, scary. The question is why. Nina's story. Nina was engaged to be married to the love of her life. Instead of buying a wedding gown, she had one made for her. She saw a beautiful porcelain bride doll in a store window and was immediately focused on the dress. So she bought the doll and took it to a well-known tailor and requested they make it exactly like the gown on the doll. Wedding day comes, everything's perfect. Nina's very happy. She was now married to the love of her life. They were an active couple, so decided to spend their honeymoon in Switzerland. They stayed in beautiful lodges in the Alps and did a lot of day hikes. During one of these hikes, tragedy struck. The story given by her new husband was that she stepped too close to the edge and a bit of it crumbled under her foot and she lost her balance, falling 50 feet onto a rocky prominence. She died instantly. Sounds a little fishy. The paranormal investigation was about a year later after Nina's husband got remarried within a year. Nina was apparently very upset with this because the activity centered on the newly married couple with focus on the new wife. After being pushed down the stairs repeatedly, she was terrified, and that's when the team came in. They discovered the energy was coming from Nina's bride doll. Talk about jealousy.
Yeah.
The dress she loved so much and wore just over a year earlier. The team discovered Nina was very unhappy that her husband had remarried so quickly and didn't mourn her loss. The team asked Nina if she wished to be removed from the location, and the answer was yes. So they packed her up and held on to her until they found a new home for her. That home was my home. I had not had Nina in my home even 2 weeks before she let us know she was there. It was about 4 a.m. in the morning when my husband and I had been tossing and turning and both woke about the same time. We woke with our hands close, so just wrapped our pinky fingers together with intentions to go back to sleep. However, Nina wasn't happy. The minute we touched pinky fingers, she let out a very loud screech of absolute rage right in the bedroom. Talk about a heart attack. That was certainly a shot of adrenaline at 4 a.m. I knew immediately it was her. There was no further activity after that, but her brooding presence was still there. The next morning, I had a conversation with Nina. I explained that she was no longer at her old house and that my husband was not her husband. I explained we were taking care of her. After that, things calmed way down. Now she pops in and out like most spirits do. Spirits are normally never present 100% of the time. There's no time on the other side of the veil, so their presence seems sporadic to us. That might explain your wondering about Alexander, Reese.
Yeah.
She is not hostile, but when around her, she definitely feels intense or heavy. She has not screamed since that night. You would think that with her husband experiencing that he couldn't just keep denying the validity of some of these experiences.
Well, it's like the ostrich that sticks their head in the sand. If I'm not looking directly at it, it's not happening.
Mm-hmm. Well, I got really good with that shadow circle. I'm just saying.
Sometimes it's a self-preservation thing. You've got to do what you got to do to maintain your own sanity because it can very quickly cause you to just spiral.
Yeah, and isn't it ironic that we're here to let people know that their experiences are valid and they're not just crazy or imagining things or overreacting?
Okay, here's what's funny. We got our dolls. I ordered Audrina was the first one. She's my standing up porcelain, beautiful blonde haired girl. Found her. I found the seller on eBay. The seller's name is Fatality. That's Fayetally. And she had this long description on who Audrina was, how she had passed, what to expect. I'll post all of that in the Patreon. So I went on eBay. I decided to purchase this doll. I liked what I read about her. I liked all the sellers' reviews was a big thing that I looked at. And so we ordered Audrina. She came in. Now, at this point, this is September of 2022. We're packing to make a 1,000-mile move within the next 2 months. So I order this doll. The house is in complete chaos. Everything's broken down. Everything's in boxes. Kids are running all over the place. It's a mess. So it was a very chaotic time in life. So shortly after we ordered her, I was like, she needs a friend, especially with everything that's going on right now. So I contacted the same seller. She had another doll named Brooke. And so I liked what it said about Brooke. I liked her description, but I messaged the seller and I was like, listen, our house is in chaos right now. It's in shambles. We're getting ready to move. We want Audrina to have somebody familiar with her. So I'm interested in Brooke, but have they interacted? Are they so-called friends? And she said, yes, they have interacted. They do know each other. So we kind of brought Brooke in as like a comfort thing for Audrina. But Brooke was an 8-year-old little girl. Audrina was 17. So Audrina kind of had that comfort of looking after Brooke. And so we ordered Brooke.
Mm-hmm.
As she was in transit to come to us, there was Hurricane Ian was coming through. And we had like the nasty, we didn't get hit really bad where we were, but we had the storms and the nasty wind and everything. So I got a notification that Brooke had been delivered, and we had a 6-foot perimeter fence that went around our entire 2-acre property. And there was a gate at the beginning. So we always kept our gate locked to protect our animals. So the delivery people were known to just pull up to our gate and chunk boxes over the gate into the yard. So I'm looking out the window all day.
Trying to keep an eye out in the middle of a hurricane, making sure that these delivery people aren't chunking my porcelain doll over a 6-foot tall fence.
Lovely.
So I get a notification that it was delivered, and it's a raging, like literally a hurricane out there. And I run outside, I'm in the pouring rain, I'm looking around in all the bushes and everywhere where they like to chunk these boxes. And there's nothing. There's no box. There's nothing. And I'm freaking out. And I'm messaging the seller. I'm messaging PayPal. I'm messaging post office. Like, where the hell is my doll? It said she was delivered. I'm not seeing her anywhere.
And this was Brooke, right?
This is for Brooke. She was the younger one.
Right. So Brooke's out there in the storm.
Yeah, she's just floating around in the hurricane somewhere. We had a sign on our gate that had our phone number, like contact information, because we were a wildlife rehab center. So we had to have people not chunking animals over the gate like delivery people did.
Right.
So we had our phone numbers and everything. We get this car pulls up into the driveway, never seen them before, and they're outside the gate and they're honking, and then our phones start ringing and we're like, who the hell is this? So I answer it, and it's somebody that wasn't speaking English very well, and they're like, we have your package. I'm like, what the hell? So we go out there and there's Brooke.
Wow.
And they had opened the box. So I don't know if they had deliberately taken the package and then realized like there was a haunted doll in there, and we're like, we're going to take her back because
we ain't fucking with this.
yeah, I
Mm-hmm.
think that's what it was, because they were all kind of like shoving the box into our hands, and they're like, here, take it, take it, take it. I'm like, okay, thank you for my haunted doll. Appreciate you. So what's funny is, because we told Audrina, like Audrina has always had a place in the living room with the family. We've always tried to make her like integrated into the family. So we told her when we ordered Brooke, and we're like, hey, we've got a friend for you on the way. It's somebody you know, so you're not going to be alone with all this shit that's going on around the house. So Nick is he's an open-minded skeptic. He wants to believe, but he never has experiences of his own. And it pisses him off when I'll tell him, like, hey, there's somebody in the front room. And he's like, well, I don't see anything. And I was like, well, do you feel it? He's like, well, no. Well, what do you want me to do?
How come I don't see anything, damn it?
Yeah, exactly. So the house that we were in, Brooke was on the way. We knew she was in transit, but she wasn't there yet. We had Sage and her best friend was over. They were outside doing something. And we had Isabel and Nico in the living room. So the way the house was set up, you come in the front door, the master bedroom's to the left, the living room, the front door opens into the living room. So the majority of the living room was to the right, and then you go straight and you're in the kitchen. So Nick's coming in the front door, and he's walking towards the kitchen. He sees Isabel and Nico to his right, but he glances over into our room and he sees a little girl in there standing in front of our bed, looking up, just watching TV like our kids do. They'll be walking through and see something on the screen and they just stop and stare.
Right.
And he looks over, he sees Isabel and Nico, and then he looks back in the room and the girl is gone. And the sheer terror in his face at that moment.
So it was like he saw it first, but it didn't register. And then he had to turn around and look again, but it was gone.
Yep. So he grabbed, and it was so funny. He went and he got all 4 kids and lined them up in the exact spot that he saw this kid, to try to see if he could match up the height as to who it was that he saw. And it didn't match any of them, but it did match Brooke's description in life.
And Brooke just wanted to be with the other kids.
I think that she just came a little bit early. She knew she was on her way. She knew she was coming to see Audrina. So she just came to check out the place a little bit, saw something on TV that she liked, and was just, checking the place out when
That's awesome.
But that was his really only real experience with the paranormal or the dolls.
Well, and they do have that tether that, like we've discussed, there's no
Mhm.
real time frame that's like ours. There's no linear time frame. There's no space or distance that they cannot cover. If they can have any sort of link, energetic link to you, they can be there.
Yeah, she knew she was coming to see Audrina, so she just got there before her vessel did.
That's awesome.
But when we were moving a couple weeks later,
we had a total of 3 U-Hauls, and then the van with the kids and a couple other animals in it that I was driving. So we had a procession, and we had the animal hauler with like the pigs and the horses. And then we had Nick driving a U-Haul, and he had animals in the front seat. We had a friend that was driving a second U-Haul, and she had my chickens and stuff in the front seat. and then I was behind him with the kids and, everybody else. So we didn't want the girls, and I continually told them, listen, I'm sorry things are chaotic when you guys come in now. I promise it's not always going to be this way. We're getting ready to move. So we wound up not wanting them to feel like they weren't part of the family. So my friend that was driving the U-Haul with the chickens had two porcelain dolls on the front seat of the U-Haul next to her that drove up there with her, fastened in seatbelts, so that they didn't feel like they weren't part of the family.
And this story, my friend, is simply one of the many reasons that I love your face and I love being your friend.
We didn't want them to feel like they weren't one of the regular kids. But then once we got here, they took some time to adjust. We've been here for a little over a year now, and we've had a couple instances. But the most recent experience was a couple weeks ago when I went into the kitchen and I looked out the corner of my eye. I saw a little girl in shadow that was standing next to the guest room door, and it scared the shit out of me at first because I wasn't expecting it. And it wasn't until retrospect that I realized it had to have been Brooke. But it's that shock of not expecting to see somebody there that scared the shit out of me. And they'll play with toys. We'll hear toys go off in the middle of the night when all the cats are sleeping in our room. We know it's not them. Things like that we can attribute to them, but we make sure that they know you're part of the family. We keep you in the room that we spend the most time in so that you guys don't ever feel like you're left out or anything. We have to maintain that relationship with them so that they don't feel some type of way or feel like they're forgotten about or just an object. So, yep, that's our haunted dolls. Well, thanks for hanging out with us for another episode, guys. We really appreciate your support. We will post all of the links, all of the pictures, all of the episode extras to our Patreon page, and we'll link that in the show notes as well. We have a Facebook page, Haunted Tea Podcast, where we post business stuff, things related to the podcast, upcoming episodes. We have a Haunted Tea Podcast ghostly gossip group that you can join. You can share memes, you can go in and tell your own stories, you can talk to other listeners, you can discuss the episodes, whatever it is that you want. We're trying really hard to maintain this as a safe place for people to discuss their experiences without feeling like they're being judged or anything like that. As always, we appreciate your support. Like and rate us on Spotify, please. Tell your friends, tell your family to give us a listen and help the Spotify algorithm gods to bless us further. And we will see you next week. Stay spooky, y'all.
Bye.